Hey, this is Eternal King here, bringing you another LOR video. So I wanted to talk a little bit, once again about the difference between Standard and Eternal. So let's say I'm having a best of three against an opponent on Eternal Casual Ladder. They play two decks, which they view are competitive. They play Riven Morgana, which is one of the top Standard decks in the meta, and they play Azir Aurelia, one of the top decks in the Eternal meta. So they're net decking, they're grabbing these lists, they're feeling very confident about their ability to pilot these top lists, and to be honest, they piloted them just fine. There was nothing wrong with the way they played. But I took both games back to back, and if this was a tournament setting, the only way the opponent could at that point beat me out is if they basically won 3 games in a row to my 2 games, which is exceptionally unlikely. So that best of 3 is already over against that opponent. What have I played? Well, I'm still playing my off-meta decks, right? So I've got my elusive brew here, which is still exceptionally powerful in the Eternal meta. The reason why I like it is because it really runs counter to the way that most competitive players pilot LOR decks, and Swim loved elusives too. It's not just me. He was a huge elusive guy. And I feel the same way because the play patterns and the burst speed buffing and the way that you interact with the opponent's life total and the way that you choose blocks, all of it is non-standard piloting. You can go for the big sparkle fly into Azir Aurelia, and that's going to feel really good because then they have to, they're basically putting them on a bounce, or they just don't get to win. I don't even think this list runs the bounce, but you should be on the bounce 100% of the time. And they were, so they bounced the Sparkle Fly. But that was after the Sparkle Fly had already healed for a ton. And so that game was already mine. So just finished them off. It wasn't this game, but the one against Morgana, I finished them off with a Mystic Shot. But I would say that the Morgana matchup was a little worse because of the stuns and the main deck hushes. So that felt a little tighter. And then of course they have the 1-drop spam to pressure you and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, just making the right calls and playing the game correctly meant that the opponent didn't have much of a chance. Taking the blocks that you need to, tutoring for Zoe's stun at slow speed, these are all just like standard techniques that the elusive deck uses to, again, mess with the opponent's piloting ability. And that's what I love about this deck so much, is just like everything's burst speed. You have access to the big 8-drop, which gives things spell shield and gives you a big blocker. Winged Messenger is kind of overstated for what it does, and it's a nice little blocker if you have to throw it out there. I love everything about this deck, and so again, winning a best of 3 against both the top deck in Standard, or one of the top decks in Standard, and one of the top decks in Eternal back-to-back against the same person, that shouldn't be hard if you understand how Eternal works as a format. Which is, you pick a deck, you build it, you sculpt it, you swear by it, and it doesn't really matter what matchup you run into, you're going to feel like you have decent chances at winning, and that's the way Eternal is. It doesn't really matter how your opponent pilots. It doesn't really matter what your opponent plays. At the end of the day, you're confident enough in the flow of your deck and the Yu-Gi-Oh, mechanics, so to speak, which is just like, it's very hard to describe, but it is just the intrinsic flow of the deck. You're confident enough in the way of it's not even piloting, right? You're not piloting in a linear fashion. Oh, this decision and that decision, and then this decision after that, and then this is how you play, and this is going to maximize my win rate. No, you're just flowing it out, you're just feeling it out, and you're just playing games, and you're winning games, and you're making these sort of spontaneous plays and decisions, and that is the Swim method, right? So yeah, again, I will beat Azir Aurelia, which is the top deck in Eternal, 100% of the time, because again, I'm no stranger to the Eternal format, and Azir Aurelia is a long-standing deck in that format. And to get to Masters previously, I had to crush this deck. So crushing it, years later isn't really going to make much of a difference to me because I've done it before, and it hasn't changed at all. So that's what I'm like. The big thing about Eternal versus Standard is like, this is arguably one of the best decks in the entire game of all formats, just like across the board. It's one of the best decks in the game. So knowing how to beat this deck specifically is what makes a good Eternal player, right? Just like arguably, you know, it could be Graplr playing Bruam Nora or whatever. He needs to know this matchup. And of course, you know, if opponents would rather run top tier standard decks, you need to know how to beat this stuff too with your Eternal deck. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. So that's the way Eternal works as a format, is that instead of like picking a top deck and just grinding it out and grinding it out and grinding it out and making all the right linear decisions until you're like top of Masters, that's the way Standard works. In Eternal, it's picking an off-meta deck that you are very confident in into those matchups with the meta decks. And then instead of grinding, you're basically playing in such a way that your opponent can't really run their game plan. It's almost like counterplay. Instead of piloting your deck in the optimal linear fashion, you're piloting your deck in a fashion that is suboptimal for the opponent. And that's, you know, why I do so much better in this format and why I can win best of threes against any deck an opponent picks in Eternal, kind of no problem. Because I've done it before and I'll do it again. Now, some people hate that, you know. Someone like Bajan, you know, if he can't play his Nora, you know, his Nora Elder Dragon deck, and if he can't play that optimally, and if he can't guarantee wins, and if he can't, you know, win tournaments, like that's going to feel bad for him. So he had to create the Standard format so that he can continue to grind and pilot his decks optimally. In Eternal, again, like I said, you know, he won't be able to reach top of Masters with his Zero Aurelia. I don't care if it's Majin Bay. I don't care who's playing it. At the end of the day, it doesn't. That might not actually be the optimal pick. Like on a percentage basis, yes, it looks optimal. But as an experienced Eternal player, you might look at that and be like, "Wow, I really don't like the matchups there. I really don't feel confident into the, you know, all the different decks I'm gonna have to deal with. I don't think the deck's responsive enough. I don't love, you know, running a rally deck into this or that." So that's the big difference between formats, is that a lot of the time the optimal deck is actually not optimal. So this is Eternal King signing out. Again, just due to the way that the LOR devs have designed the game, I have to wait till end of February to play the superior format. But, you know, whatever. Again, it's fine. I can still run casual best of threes with people in this format, and I'm happy to do so. So, again, if you want to hit me up, you can. But otherwise, you'll see me online. All right, take care.